chasing men around, returning to a tastefully designed home, which she surely owned, where her husband and child were waiting, with love and dinner. But adulthood was no longer a fantasy to shape. It was a reality to deal with. Her uniform was old Reebok sneakers, and whatever hoodie was clean. She could barely tolerate the men around her enough to wake up each morning, let alone run her own company. And she had nothing but streaming services in her one-room home, if you could call a rented studio apartment a home, to return to. There was no single thing to blame, just a continuous string of dreams that hadn't worked out. Being with Peter made her feel like the ambitious know-it-all she was in college, because he expected nothing less. She was allowed to be her old self with him. He reminded her who she was. She placed her hands on his shoulders like softballs in her palms. It still surprised her how round and firm they'd become, how different he was from the skinny nerd she used to know. She had stopped dreaming that something might happen between them when Nicole had moved in. Instead, she took solace in the fact that he would never really be wholly happy with her, that part of him would always need Edie. "How's your cult going?" she shouted into his ear, Rihanna blaring in the background. "Some cults are good, E." He loved the chance to defend himself, and she loved making him try. "Just because you had one bad CrossFit experience. After 10 minutes of exercise, you can't move for a week. How is that good? If you tried it more than once, maybe you'd know." His hands were tight on her hips. "Sorry, I don't want to align myself with a bunch of libertarians who pride themselves on competition and aggression, but I'm glad it works for you." "And yet, you work in tech?" She had to laugh, or cry. He looked down at her with his big olive eyes, shining with pleasure at their usual push and pull. When the song ended, Peter leaned closer, his mouth to her ear. "I have to tell you something." She braced herself. They had reached the age when this phrase was a predictable prelude. Marriage or children. One, then the other. Surely he hadn't proposed to Nicole without consulting with Edie, but she'd assumed the topic was on the horizon. "Nicole and I broke up." The music faded, and she jumped back to look at him, desperate for more than these small, impossible words. Life-changing words, which he was somehow dropping like an afterthought on the dance floor. He had to be fucking with her. He and Nicole had considered taking a break in the past, but a full-on breakup, and without discussing it with Edie first? Her heart raced beneath her damp V-neck t-shirt. "What the fuck, Peter?" "It's too loud in here," he shouted, Drake now unbearably pounding. She followed him through the sweaty basement crowd, up the stairs and down the hall, until they found an empty corner. Although Edie considered Peter a gem, a sparkling pearl in the middle of the foul, murky ocean, otherwise known as dating at 35 in San Francisco, he was still a man. And what had happened, she realized, as he began to describe the previous evening, was that he had stopped feeling his girlfriend of 7 years. "I feel terrible about it." He shook his head, staring down at his gray New Balances. "I really thought we could make it work." The thing about Peter was that he really did want to make it work. He wanted to be an average guy who could fall in love with an average woman and have a kid and buy a house and be a good dad with a good dog who was very good at playing fetch. But Peter had become a multimillionaire at 29 when his ad tech company Primal Search went public, a year after he'd gotten together with Nicole. Back then, the tech scene was still emergent, and the city was full of nerdy, insecure men. Which is to say, it was a woman's market. When Nicole expressed interest, Peter thought he'd won the lottery. Edie hated the idea of love at first sight.